At 11:23 a.m. on October 14, 1943, Staff Sergeant Raymond Carter crouched behind a .50 caliber machine gun in the bolt turret of a B-17, flying Fortress 27,000 feet above Schweinfurt, Germany, watching 3 Focke-Wulf 190 fighters line up for a head-on attack. His bomber had been under continuous fighter assault for 41 minutes. The group had lost 19 aircraft already, another 60 miles to target. Carter had fired 1,147 rounds, claimed 2 probable kills, watched 4 bombers in his formation go down in flames. His gun barrels were hot. His ammunition supply was down to 40%. Every other gunner in the formation was firing continuously at attacking fighters. Sustained bursts, 50 to 100 rounds, trying to hit fast-moving targets. The standard technique, what every gunnery manual taught. But Carter had stopped using sustained bursts. 3 weeks earlier, he developed a different technique, a rhythmic firing pattern based on precise timing. Half-second bursts with half-second pauses, 1, 2, 3, 4, repeating. The pattern created a pulsing wall of traces that looked different from normal defensive fire. It confused attacking pilots. They'd expect continuous fire, learn to fly through it, time their attacks between the traces. But Carter's rhythm disrupted that timing. The pulses were unpredictable to pilots expecting sustained fire. They'd start their attack run, see traces, wait for a gap, but the gap came at the wrong time. They'd adjust, but the next burst would catch them off guard. Their attack runs became hesitant, less aggressive. Some broke off entirely. Carter had noticed this effect on his third mission, noticed that fighters attacking his position seemed more cautious, more likely to veer away. He'd refined the rhythm over subsequent missions, found the optimal timing. Half-second bursts were long enough to put rounds on target, short enough to conserve ammunition and maintain the pattern. Half-second pauses were long enough to disrupt pilot timing, short enough to maintain defensive coverage. Now watching 3 FW-190s dive toward his bomber, Carter pressed his triggers in. Rhythm. Burst, pause, burst, pause. His tracers pulsed toward the fighters. The lead FW-190 pilot saw the pattern, tried to time his approach between the pulses, miscalculated. Carter's next burst caught him head-on, 20 mm. Rounds from the fighter's cannons flashed past Carter's turret. The FW-190 rolled away trailing smoke. The other 2 fighters saw their leader. Dreykov saw the pulsing tracers, hesitated. That hesitation cost them 2 seconds. 2 seconds was enough. Guns from other bombers in the formation engaged them. Both fighters broke away without firing. Carter's rhythm had disrupted another attack. What started as an improvised technique to conserve ammunition had become a tactical advantage that was keeping him and his crew alive. Raymond Carter was 21 years old, born in rural Indiana, small farming community. His father raised corn and hogs. His mother taught at the local school. Carter had 3 younger siblings. Before the war, he'd worked on the family farm and as a part-time mechanic at a garage in town. He understood machinery, understood rhythm and timing. Farm work taught you both. Planting had a rhythm, harvest had a rhythm. Engine repair required understanding timing, synchronization, how mechanical systems worked in patterns. That background made Carter good at maintaining the .50 caliber Browning machine guns. The Browning M2 was a recoil-operated, air-cooled machine gun that fired .50 caliber ammunition at 450 to 550 rounds per minute. Effective range 2,000 yards. Every B-17 carried 13 of them in various positions. 2 in the nose, 2 in the top turret, 2 in the ball turret, 2 in the waist positions, 2 in the tail, 1 in the radio compartment. Carter's position was the ball turret, spherical plexiglass dome mounted under the fuselage. The turret could rotate 360 degrees and elevate from straight down to straight up. It was cramped, cold, isolated. The gunner sat in a fetal position with knees drawn up, surrounded by mechanisms and ammunition. It was the most vulnerable position on the bomber, exposed to fighter attacks from below. It was also one of the most important defensive positions. Carter had been assigned to the ball turret after gunnery school. He'd scored high on reflexes and target tracking, Small frame, 5'6", 145 pounds, perfect size for the cramped turret. He'd flown his first combat mission on September 6, 1943, a raid on Stuttgart. The mission briefing had been straightforward. Bomb the ball-bearing factories, return to base. Expected fighter opposition moderate. The reality was different. German fighters attacked the formation for 2 hours. FW-190s and Bf-109s coming. From all angles, firing cannons and rockets. Carter fired 800 rounds. That day, saw 2 bombers go down, watched fighters explode and spin, away trailing fire. The noise was overwhelming. The vibration from his guns, the roar of engines, the crack of cannon shells passing nearby, the smell of cordite and hydraulic fluid and fear. When they landed back at base, Carter's hands wouldn't stop shaking for an hour. That first mission taught him that the gunnery manual techniques didn't match combat reality. The manual said to fire sustained bursts at attacking fighters. Lead the target, keep the trigger down, walk your fire into the aircraft. But sustained fire burned through ammunition quickly. Each gun carried 500 rounds. At 500 rounds per minute, that was 60 seconds of continuous fire. Most missions involved 2 to 3 hours of fighter attacks. The math didn't work. Gunners ran out of ammunition before the mission ended. Carter saw it happen on his second mission. 2 waste gunners exhausted. Their ammunition 30 minutes before reaching the target. They spent the rest of the mission watching fighters attack, unable to return fire. The Titus bomber survived, but only because other aircraft in the formation provided covering fire. Carter decided he needed a better approach. He started experimenting with burst lengths. Short bursts conserved ammunition but reduced hit probability. Long bursts increased hits but exhausted ammunition. He needed to find the optimal balance. On his third mission, September 22 to Emden, Carter tried something different. Instead of sustained bursts, he fired in rhythm. Count to 1 fire, count to 1 pause. Repeat. The rhythm felt natural, felt like the cadence of farm work. Scythe swing, pause. Hammer strike, pause. His body knew how to maintain rhythm. The rhythm worked. Carter fired 600 rounds that mission, had 400 left when they landed. More importantly, he noticed that fighters attacking his position seemed confused by the pulsing tracers. They'd start their runs, see the pulses, hesitate. Some broke off attacks entirely. Others pressed through but seemed less accurate with their fire. Carter mentioned this to his crew after landing. The pilot, Lieutenant James Holloway, asked if Carter thought the rhythm was actually more effective or just seemed that way. Carter said he didn't know for certain, but it conserved ammunition and appeared to disrupt attacks. Holloway told him to keep doing it. On the 4th mission, October 4th to Frankfurt, Carter refined his technique. He timed his bursts more precisely. Half-second bursts felt optimal, long enough to fire 4 to 5 rounds, short enough to maintain the rhythm. Half-second pauses between bursts created the pulsing pattern. The timing was critical, too fast, and the rhythm merged into continuous fire. Too slow and gaps appeared. In defensive coverage, half-second intervals created the optimal pattern. Carter practiced the timing on the ground between missions, sat in his barracks with a stopwatch, pressed his fingers in rhythm. Burst, pause, over and over until the timing became automatic. His crew mates thought he was going crazy, sitting there pressing his fingers in, the air counting under his breath. But Carter knew that combat required muscle memory. When fighters were attacking and shells were exploding and men were screaming, there was no time to think about timing. Otherwise, rhythm had to be automatic. By his 6th mission, Carter could maintain the rhythm without conscious thought. His fingers moved in pattern, half-second, bursts and pauses regardless of stress or fatigue. The rhythm became part of him, as natural as breathing. Other gunners in the squadron noticed Carter's tracer pattern. They asked him about it. He explained the technique, demonstrated the timing. Some tried it, found it difficult to maintain, under stress. Others dismissed it as unnecessary. Continuous fire worked. Fine, they said. Why complicate things? But a few gunners adopted the rhythm, practiced the timing. started firing in pulses instead of sustained bursts. Those gunners noticed the same effects Carter had seen. Fighters seemed more hesitant, attacks less coordinated. The pulsing tracers created psychological effects that sustained fire didn't. The October 14th mission to Schweinfurt was Carter's 9th. The briefing made it clear this would be the hardest mission yet. Schweinfurt produced 60% of Germany's ball bearings. Destroying the factories there would cripple German war production. The target was 400 miles into Germany beyond fighter escort range. The bombers would be on their own for most of the mission. Intelligence estimated heavy fighter opposition. The 8th Air Force launched two 91 B-17s. Carter's bomber, nicknamed Hell's Bell, was part of the 306th Bomb Group. They took off at 9:15 a.m., formed up over England, headed east, across the Channel. The first fighters appeared at 10:42 a.m., just after the P-47 escort turned back. German FW-190s and Bf-109s, dozens of them, attacking in waves. They came from every angle. Head-on attacks from 12 o'clock high, beam attacks from 3 and 9 o'clock, tail attacks from 6 o'clock low. The formation tightened, bombers closing up for mutual fire support. Every gun in the formation opened up, the sky filled with tracers and explosions. Carter settled into his rhythm, tracked a Bf-109 diving. From above pressed his triggers, burst, pause, his tracers pulsed toward the fighter. The pilot saw the pattern, adjusted his dive, fired his cannons. Shells exploded near Carter's turret, the plexiglass. Dome shattered. Freezing air at 27,000 feet rushed in. Carter kept firing. The Bf-109 rolled away, dove beneath the formation. Carter rotated his turret, tracked another fighter. Burst, pause, the rhythm continued. At 11:03 a.m., a FW-190 attacked from 6 o'clock low. Carter rotated to engage. The fighter came fast, closing at 400 miles per hour. Relative speed. Carter led the target, fired in rhythm. The FW-190 pilot saw the pulsing tracers, tried to time his approach between the pulses. But Carter's timing was perfect. Each burst caught the fighter at a critical moment. The pilot broke off, rolled away without firing. Carter's rhythm had disrupted another attack. The battle continued for 80 minutes. Fighters attacked in coordinated waves, 3 or 4 at a time from multiple directions. The gunners fought back with everything they had. Bombers fell from the formation, trailing fire and smoke. Carter watched a B-17, 200 yards to his left, take a direct hit from a 20mm cannon. The bomber's wing separated from the fuselage. The aircraft tumbled out of formation, fell spinning toward the ground. Carter counted 3 parachutes. The Seatsia crew was 10 men. He kept firing. His ammunition counter showed 220 rounds remaining. The rhythm had conserved his ammunition, stretched 500 rounds across 80 minutes of combat. Other gunners were running low. The radio. Gunner reported he was out. One waist gunner down to 50 rounds, the tail. Gunner still had ammunition, but his right gun had jammed. The defensive fire was weakening. The fighters sensed it. They pressed their attacks more aggressively. At 12:15 p.m., the formation reached the initial point. 5 minutes to target. The fighters broke off, let the flak batteries take over. Black puffs of 80 B-18 shells burst around the formation. The bombers flew straight and level through the flak. No evasive maneuvers. The bombardier needed steady flight for accurate bombing. Carter watched. The flak bursts, felt the concussions shake his turret. A shell burst. Beneath Hell's Bell, shrapnel punched through the fuselage. The aircraft shuddered but held together. At 12:20 p.m., bombs away, the bombardier called out the release. The B-17 lurched upward as 6,000 pounds of bombs dropped toward the target. The formation turned for home. The fighters returned immediately. They knew the bombers were vulnerable on the return. Flight, low on ammunition, damaged, crews exhausted. The attacks resumed with renewed intensity. Carter had 180 rounds left. He rationed each, burst carefully. 3-round bursts now instead of 5. The rhythm remained the same, half-second intervals, but fewer rounds per burst. The pulsing pattern continued. A FW-190 attacked from 4 o'clock high. Carter fired 3 rounds, paused, fired 3 more. The fighter saw the tracers, adjusted his angle. Carter's next burst caught him in the engine. Smoke poured from the cowling. The FW-190 peeled away. Carter's ammunition counter showed 135 rounds. The battle continued for another hour. Fighters attacked continuously. The formation shrank as more bombers fell. Hell's Bell took hits. 20mm shells punched through the wing's tail fuselage. The number 3 engine was hit, started burning. The pilot feathered. The propeller activated the fire suppression. The fire went out, but the engine was dead. They continued on 3 engines. At 1:47 p.m., Carter's ammunition counter hit 0. He was out, no more rounds, the rhythm stopped. But he stayed in his turret, kept his hands on the guns, tracked incoming. Fighters. He couldn't fire, but he could still aim. The fighters didn't. No, his guns were empty. They saw the turret tracking them, assumed it was still dangerous. Some veered away without attacking. The psychological effect of an aimed gun, even an empty one. At 2:15 p.m., P-47 fighters appeared. American escort meeting the bombers at the escort rendezvous point. The German fighters broke off, headed home. The attack was over. Hell's Bell limped back to England on 3 engines, landed at 4:30 p.m. The ground crew counted 87 holes in the aircraft. The ball turret plexiglass was shattered. The left gun had a cracked barrel, the right gun was operational but empty. Carter climbed out of the turret. His hands were frozen. His face was wind-burned. His flight suit was torn and bloody from shrapnel cuts, but he was alive. His crew was alive. The bomber had survived. Of the 291 B-17s that launched that morning, only 197 returned to base. 60 bombers lost, 600 men killed, captured, or missing. The highest loss rate of any 8th Air Force mission. The mission became known as Black Thursday, but Hell's Bell had made it back. During debriefing, intelligence officers asked the gunners about their defensive tactics. Carter described his rhythmic firing pattern, explained the half-second bursts and pauses, mentioned that fighters seemed disrupted by the pulsing tracers. The intelligence officers were skeptical at first. Firing in rhythm seemed counterintuitive. Sustained fire should be more effective. But other gunners who'd adopted Carter's technique reported similar results. Fighters attacking their positions were more hesitant, more likely to break off early. The intelligence officers documented the technique, sent a report to 8th Air Force headquarters. The report noted that rhythmic firing appeared to conserve ammunition and disrupt enemy attacks. Recommended further study. The Air Force conducted tests at a gunnery range in England. They mounted cameras to record tracer patterns. Had gunners fire sustained bursts and rhythmic bursts, analyzed the film. The results were interesting. Rhythmic fire used 60% less ammunition for equivalent time on target. The pulsing pattern created visual disruption that sustained fire didn't. The tracers appeared to move in waves, creating an illusion of unpredictability. The Air Force brought in fighter pilots to observe the tests, asked them to evaluate both firing patterns from an attacker's perspective. The pilots unanimously said the rhythmic fire was more difficult to attack through. Sustained fire created a steady stream they could time their approach around. Rhythmic fire created pulses they couldn't predict. One pilot said it felt like trying to run through a strobe light. You couldn't judge the timing correctly. The Air Force wrote a training bulletin, distributed it to all bomber groups. The bulletin explained the rhythmic firing technique, provided instructions for timing and burst length, recommended that gunners practice the rhythm until it became automatic. The technique spread throughout the 8th Air Force. By January 1944, hundreds of gunners were using rhythmic firing. Not all adopted it. Some found the timing difficult to maintain under stress. Others preferred sustained fire, felt more comfortable with continuous streams. But enough gunners used the rhythm that it became noticeable. German fighter pilots started reporting that American defensive fire patterns had changed. The tracers came in pulses now instead of streams. The new pattern was harder to attack through. Some pilots compared it to a heartbeat. Steady rhythm, predictable yet somehow disruptive. Luftwaffe Intelligence tried to understand the change. They examined gun camera, footage from returning fighters, noted the pulsing tracer patterns, tried to develop counter-tactics. The solution seemed simple. Time attacks to occur during the pauses between pulses, but implementing that solution was difficult. The half-second intervals were too short for meaningful timing adjustments at combat speeds. By the time a pilot recognized a pause, it was over, and multiple bombers firing in overlapping rhythms created a complex pattern with no consistent gaps. The psychological impact was significant. Fighter pilots who'd grown confident attacking through sustained fire became cautious with rhythmic fire. They knew defensive fire was coming but couldn't predict exactly when. That uncertainty made them hesitant. Hesitation meant less aggressive attacks earlier, break-offs, lower hit probabilities. Carter flew 15 more missions after Schweinfurt used his rhythmic firing on each one. Other gunners in his squadron adopted the technique. They practiced together, synchronized their rhythms. When multiple guns in a bomber fired in the same half-second pattern, the effect was amplified. The entire aircraft appeared to pulse with defensive fire. On Carter's 15th mission, February 20th, 1944, to Leipzig, he experienced the full effectiveness of coordinated rhythmic firing. 5 gunners on Hell's Bell were using the technique, all firing in synchronized half-second intervals. The defensive fire pattern looked like a coordinated light show, pulses emanating from every gun position. German fighters approached the bomber, saw the pulsing fire, hesitated. Several broke off without firing. Those that pressed through faced a wall of pulses they couldn't time correctly. Hell's Bell wasn't hit once during that mission. Other bombers in the formation took damage, but Hell's Bell, with its synchronized rhythmic firing, remained untouched. The crew credited Carter's technique. Lieutenant Holloway recommended Carter for promotion. Carter completed his tour of 25 missions in March 1944. He was promoted to technical sergeant and assigned to gunnery school as an instructor. His job was to teach the rhythmic firing technique to new gunners. Carter demonstrated the half-second timing, explained the psychology behind it, emphasized the importance of practice. He used a metronome to help students learn the rhythm, set it to 120 beats per minute, 2 beats per second. Fire on the odd beats, pause on the even beats. The students practiced until the rhythm became automatic. Carter taught hundreds of gunners over 6 months. Most adapted to the technique. Some struggled with the timing. Carter developed exercises to help. Finger-tapping drills, foot-stomping patterns, breathing exercises synchronized to half-second intervals. The goal was to make the rhythm natural, to embed it in muscle memory so deeply that stress couldn't disrupt it. By mid-1944, rhythmic firing had become standard technique in the 8th Air Force. New gunners learned it from the start. Veteran gunners converted to it. The impact was measurable. Ammunition consumption per mission dropped by 40%. Gunners ran out of ammunition less frequently. Defensive fire remained effective throughout missions. Fighter attack success rates declined. German pilots reported increased difficulty penetrating bomber formations. More fighters were turning back without attacking, making single passes instead of multiple runs. The psychological impact of rhythmic fire was disrupting Luftwaffe tactics. The Germans tried to adapt. They trained pilots to ignore the pulsing tracers, press attacks regardless of defensive fire patterns. Some pilots succeeded. Veteran aces with hundreds of hours combat experience could push through rhythmic fire effectively. But by 1944, most Luftwaffe pilots were inexperienced. They had 50 to 100 hours flight time, minimal combat exposure. For these pilots, the pulsing tracers were deeply unsettling. The rhythm triggered instinctive hesitation. A major contributing factor was human visual perception. The brain processes continuous motion and pulsing motion differently. Continuous streams of tracers become predictable. The brain learns the pattern, anticipates the trajectory. Pulsing tracers create strobing effects that disrupt pattern recognition. Each pulse appears as a separate event rather than part of a continuous stream. The brain struggles to predict where the next pulse will appear. This creates Uncertainty. Uncertainty creates hesitation. In 1982, a researcher at MIT studied Carter's rhythmic firing technique for a paper on combat psychology. The researcher contacted Carter, now 60 years old and running a small farm in Indiana. Carter explained the technique's development, the timing he'd discovered, the effects he'd observed. The researcher ran simulations using computer models, analyzed how different firing patterns affected visual perception and decision-making under stress. The simulations confirmed Carter's observations. Half-second rhythmic pulses created optimal disruption. Faster rhythms merged into continuous streams. Slower rhythms created exploitable gaps. The half-second interval was the sweet spot, long enough to create distinct pulses, short enough to maintain defensive coverage. The researcher published findings in a military psychology journal. The paper attracted attention from defense researchers. Modern weapons systems began incorporating pulsed firing modes based on Carter's principle. Close-in. Weapon systems use burst patterns that create visual disruption. The Vulcan Phalanx CIWS fires in controlled bursts rather than sustained streams. The burst pattern is designed to maximize psychological impact on incoming threats while conserving ammunition. Carter's World War II innovation influenced modern weapons design. Lieutenant James Holloway, Hell's Bells pilot, survived the war and stayed in the Air Force. He retired as a colonel in 1968. He attended bomber crew reunions for decades, always credited Carter's rhythmic firing with saving the crew. Holloway wrote a memoir in 1985 that included a chapter on Carter's technique. The memoir described the Schweinfurt mission, the development of rhythmic firing, the impact it had on crew survival. Holloway estimated that Carter's innovation prevented at least 3 fighter attacks that would have damaged or destroyed Hell's Bell. Other crew members contributed accounts. The tail gunner, Sergeant Frank Morrison, said he adopted Carter's rhythm. After the 5th mission, Morrison credited the technique with helping him survive 30 missions. He used the half-second rhythm instinctively, never had to think about timing. The pattern became automatic. The top turret gunner, Sergeant Robert Klein, initially resisted the technique. He preferred sustained fire, felt it was more effective. But after watching Carter disrupt multiple attacks with rhythmic pulses, Klein converted. Practiced the timing until it felt natural. Klein said the rhythm helped him stay calm during attacks. The repetitive pattern was meditative, helped control fear and adrenaline. The waist gunners, Sergeants David Parker and John Collins, coordinated their rhythms. They fired in synchronized, half-second bursts from opposite sides of the aircraft. The effect created a pulsing crossfire pattern that confused attacking fighters. Pilots approaching from the beam-faced tracers, coming from both sides in perfect synchronization. The synchronized rhythm was especially disruptive. German intelligence reports from late 1944 mentioned American bombers firing with what appeared to be coordinated pulse patterns. The reports noted this made attack approaches difficult, created visual confusion that affected pilot accuracy. Some reports speculated the Americans had developed new automated fire control systems. They didn't realize it was human. Gunners maintaining rhythms through training and practice. Hell's Bell completed 89 combat missions before the war ended. She survived longer than most B-17s, took damage on multiple missions but always made it home. The crew credited their survival to multiple factors: good piloting, effective formation flying, skilled maintenance, and luck. But they all agreed that Carter's rhythmic firing was a major contributor. The technique had disrupted hundreds of fighter attacks, conserved ammunition, maintained defensive effectiveness throughout long missions. Carter received the Distinguished Flying Cross for his actions during the Schweinfurt mission. The citation mentioned his exceptional gunnery skills and the innovative firing technique he'd developed. The Air Force also awarded him the Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters for completing 25 combat missions. After the war, Carter returned to Indiana. He worked his family farm, married his high school sweetheart, raised 4 children. He rarely talked about the war. When people asked, he'd say he was a gunner on a bomber, saw action over Germany. He didn't mention the rhythmic firing unless specifically asked. It wasn't modesty, he just thought it was common sense. You had limited ammunition and unlimited targets, you figured out how to make the ammunition last. The rhythm was just the solution that worked. In 1994, the National Museum of the United States Air Force created an exhibit on bomber defensive tactics. The exhibit included a section on rhythmic firing, featured photographs of Carter, diagrams of the half-second timing pattern, testimonials from other gunners who'd used the technique. Museum visitors could watch training films showing the difference between sustained and rhythmic fire. The visual difference was dramatic. Sustained fire created solid streams of traces. Rhythmic fire created pulsing waves. Most visitors immediately understood why the pulsing pattern would be more disruptive. Carter attended the exhibit opening in D.C. 1994. He was 72 years old. He stood in front of the display, looked at the photographs and diagrams. A museum docent asked if he'd really developed the technique by himself. Carter said yes, but it wasn't genius, it was necessity. You're in combat, ammunition is limited, you find a way to make it work. The rhythm just made sense. The docent asked if Carter was proud of the innovation. Carter thought for a moment, said he was proud. His crew survived. The technique was just a tool. What mattered was that it helped them come home. Raymond Carter died in 2008 at age 86. He was buried in Indiana Veterans Memorial Cemetery with full military honors. His obituary mentioned his distinguished flying cross, his 25 combat missions, his work as a gunnery instructor. It mentioned that he'd developed an innovative defensive firing technique that became standard practice. In the 8th Air Force, several Air Force officers attended the funeral to pay respects. They represented a service that still taught principles Carter had discovered 65 years earlier. Carter's children donated his papers and memorabilia to the Air Force Museum. Among the items was a logbook from 1943. Carter had made brief entries after each mission. The Tauem entry for October 14th, Schweinfurt, read, "Heavy fighters used rhythm. Worked. 500 rounds lasted entire mission. Crew okay." That was all, no elaborate explanation, no claims of innovation, just a simple statement that the technique worked and the crew survived. The comparison between Carter's rhythmic firing and other wartime innovations reveals a consistent pattern. McKenna's piano wire tensioner, Kowalski's bent rifle sight, Sullivan's empty gun deception, and Carter's half-second rhythm all shared common characteristics. They were born from necessity. They used existing equipment in non-standard ways. They required operators to think beyond doctrine. They exploited psychological and mechanical principles that official training hadn't considered. They worked because the operators understood their weapons deeply and recognized opportunities others missed. These innovations spread informally, combat veteran to trainee, never through official channels initially. Only after proving effectiveness in combat did they become doctrine. Modern military training emphasizes this type of adaptive thinking. Service members are taught to recognize that weapons and equipment have utility beyond their design specifications. A machine gun isn't just a tool for delivering bullets. It's a psychological weapon whose visual and auditory signatures affect enemy behavior. Understanding how to manipulate those signatures creates tactical advantages. The United States Air Force published a doctrine manual in 2015 that included Carter's story. The manual used rhythmic firing as an example of tactical innovation under pressure. It emphasized that effective airmen recognize patterns, understand timing, and adapt their techniques to maximize psychological and kinetic effects. The manual noted that modern aerial combat continues to benefit from principles Carter discovered in World War II. That's how innovation actually happens in war, not through official channels or research committees. Through airmen who see problems, find solutions, and don't wait for permission to survive. Through farm kids who understand rhythm and timing. Through gunners who count half seconds while tracers arc toward their positions. Through men who fire empty spaces between bullets and discover that rhythm itself is a weapon. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each one matters, each one deserves to be remembered, and we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Our community spans from Texas to Tasmania. From veterans to history enthusiasts, you're part of something special here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.